Good evening and welcome to today's Tropics for October 5th, 2020. Please note I'm not a meteorologist and this video is just a collection of my thoughts and opinions about the storm we're talking about. And for any decision making, please consult National Hurricane Center or your local officials. So today I'm looking at recently upgraded Hurricane Delta, and it's becoming increasingly impressive today. It's much stronger than it was expected in the recon mission this afternoon, and you can see it's got a new convective burst in the eastern eye wall, and now it's trying to wrap around the northern side, so it's becoming increasingly organized too, and definitely looks like it's shaping up to be a relatively dangerous system, as it has pretty favorable conditions ahead of it, and it is already trying to rapidly intensify. Taking a look at the infrared imagery, you can see exactly how strong that convection is, and you can see this burst kind of wrapping around the system, so it's trying to go around and uh, basically close off an eye wall. It seems to be close to that based on some data we've seen from microwave passes and recon. So it definitely is getting itself going, and it is looking pretty healthy right now. Uh, no real huge impediments except for potentially some dry air. Looking at the water vapor imagery, you can see that it does look pretty favorable. The upper flow does, at least. And so uh, there is an upper low ahead of Delta. You can see it spinning around here, and this is actually acting to amplify some ridging to its east, and so that means that Delta actually gets to benefit from that upper ridging, and that's allowing the shear to get lower. So instead of getting that northeasterly shear that it was experiencing earlier today from the upper ridge to the north, that has pretty much backed off as it has its own kind of ridge, and that's keeping it from really getting sheared. So that is definitely has improved for it today, and it's probably why it's intensifying so much. However, along with that upper low, there is some dry air, and that's been trying to come into the core. We've seen some dry air intrusions earlier, even today, but it's evidently gotten that out of its system. But it is definitely a risk for it as it tries to build an inner core. So taking a look at this recon mission earlier, you can see that's quite a bit deeper than was expected to be. It was expected to be a bit over 995 millibars. Instead, the recon mission found 984 millibars, or actually 983 on the first drops on during the first pass. So it's definitely a lot stronger than forecast. Uh, and it was deepening in the last pass. So you can see the minimum pressure went down to 981 millibars, so it is deepening, and deepening likely pretty fast in the future too. However, you'll notice that there isn't a whole lot in the way of very strong wind. You can see there is a lot of tropical storm force wind, especially where the plane is at 700 millibars. But there are only a few barbs of, say, uh, hurricane force winds, so that's definitely not what you would expect for a system this deep. You'd expect a few more, and there's winds just barely justifying hurricane strength while the system's at around 980 millibars. But it does seem that there are some higher winds, especially in the layer near this, but not quite at the surface. So uh, around 50 or so millibars, or 50 to 60 at least millibars above the surface, is where you start to get into the higher winds of around 75 knots. So definitely in that deep convection, like we are seeing with values even below 80 degrees Celsius. That's definitely the sort of deep convection that's going to bring that kind of wind down on the surface, and it's likely we're going to see a big jump in the winds towards something closer to what you'd expect for a system with this sort of pressure. Also, looking at a relatively recent microwave pass a bit over 2 hours ago, or around 2.5 hours ago, actually. See, at the time, it wasn't quite closed off. There's a curved band that was trying to make an eye wall, but it wasn't quite there, and that allows for a dry air intrusion to come through the south and disrupt it. But it definitely seems that it might have closed it off given the recon mission and the fact that there's just this 40 soul hot tower trying to wrap around the system. So it definitely does seem that it might have closed that off, and given that it's already developing an inner core with as much time over water ahead of a very favorable atmospheric look, definitely dangerous situation unfolding at the moment. As Delta tries to form its inner core, conditions won't be totally perfect, so there's definitely one thing that might try to slow down intensification, maybe keep it from really bombing out, and that's some dry air to its northwest. And what this is going to do is it's going to wrap down around and try to go around the system. Now the question is it does it just go around the system and basically keep Delta's inner core pretty much unaffected? That would allow for it to keep rapidly intensifying, and it's more likely if you have a closed inner core that can really counteract those dry air intrusions, or does it somehow get into the core? And in that case, it would probably weaken it by a bit, and that's definitely the scenario we'd like to see, but it doesn't seem that likely, especially given this structure, which is probably only improved with a recent convective burst. So we'll have to watch for what the dry air does, but definitely seems like it's not going to be a huge player in the future of Delta's intensification, unfortunately. Looking at the upper level conditions, they're pretty favorable. You can see that Delta will likely be in a pretty good position, uh, basically in an upper level flow that is roughly parallel to its movement. And when you have that, that basically cancels out pretty much any shear. So it's going to have a very low shear environment while it's in the Caribbean, so it's definitely not going to have trouble with that, unlike time where it had some northerly or northeasterly shear today. So the biggest thing that might keep it from rapidly or very rapidly intensifying is that dry air, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like uh, that will have a very weak or weaker system due to that. Now, as for Delta's strength, it looks like the main player in the near term will be this mid-level ridge that will be northeast of it. And as a result, Delta will probably move west-northwest to northwest into this area and continue on that direction until it gets into the Gulf, where you have some other features that'll keep it from uh, moving in that direction continuously. At this point, given that it's moved south a bit, it's likely that places further northeast, such as Grand Cayman or Cuba, are less likely to get direct impacts in the core, but they could still get some more outer impacts. And instead, places in the northeastern Yucatan, for example, Cancun, may be under the gun more so by Delta, but it's hard to know exactly where it'll be at this point. It may it's really not it's quite difficult to forecast exactly where it'll be. It might be a little north or south, but definitely seems like those in Cancun should be prepared for the core impacts, because it does look like that area will be the most likely to feel it at this point. Now, as Delta gets into the Gulf, it's going to continue in that direction. However, it's not going to continue in that direction forever. Eventually, it's going to get on the north side of, or on the west side of this middle of a ridge, and so the flow won't be as much north or out of or towards the northwest, more so going to the north. And at the same time, you're going to have a bit of a trough in over Texas that's going to come and keep it from moving further west. So instead, it's pretty much forced to move more north and eventually towards the east north or the north or north northeast. Uh, this is just one model run. It's pretty uncertain at this point, given how far it is. Where exactly Delta is, it could be in much hitting much. It's like it's possible that it could hit pretty much anywhere along a lot of the north or northern Gulf Coast. So definitely be prepared, even if you aren't in that area that's expected to get direct impacts. It could shift quite a bit, especially with another variable in the forecast, and that is likely at this point the remnants of gamma. So it depends on how strong it is. If it's a bit stronger, that might, through the Fujiwara effect, basically make Delta move a bit more northwest and a bit faster, and that would allow it to move more west. Uh, Conversely, if it's weaker, you're not going to see as much of an effect. It's probably that would mean a more southeasterly position once it starts feeling the more northerly flows. So that's definitely something we should watch in the next couple days, and that will give us a good idea of maybe, or a better idea of where it may strike on the northern Gulf Coast, but definitely it's not quite all that certain. Luckily, the one thing that is going to keep it from being too strong on approach is the cold fronts that have come down in the past few weeks have really cooled off the coast here, and you can see right on the coast in most places the water is below 26 degrees Celsius, and that does not support a storm strengthening. So it's likely we're not going to see that sort of strengthening storms such as Laura that we saw, just because the water won't support it. So it does look likely that Delta will be weakening on approach to the northern Gulf Coast. However, even with that, it'll still likely be a dangerous storm given the surge that it'll be carrying, and even as it weakens, it'll still have quite a bit of strength left. Again, though, the most immediate impacts from Delta will be in the Caribbean through a combination of rain, surge, and wind. Right now, there is heavy rain in Jamaica, and that is from the outer bands of Hurricane Delta. So there aren't any wind warnings, but definitely it is a dangerous situation there. And they're going to have something similar as it tracks or tracks along here. As it passes by, there could be some high winds, especially in the squally weather in the Cayman Islands. So there is a tropical storm watch for that area, for the possibility of that. And then as it goes further, you're going to see higher winds depending on its track for the western part of Cuba. So you have some assortment of watches and warnings. You have tropical storm watches and warnings. You have hurricane watches and warnings for the areas. So definitely, even if you aren't in the cone right now, impacts will extend out from the center in the form of rain, surge, and wind. So depending on where you are, uh, do be prepared for possibly flooding, rain, and possible mudslides, and the storm surge as it comes in, and especially in the northeastern Yucatan, where it is currently expected to impact directly. Uh, Definitely be prepared for conditions to deteriorate as early as tomorrow afternoon as it approaches the area. And after that, definitely even just from eastern Texas all the way to the Florida Panhandle, just keep an eye on Delta, because you may see its impacts next late during the late week, just before the weekend, likely on Friday. Otherwise, there isn't too much else going on in the Atlantic at the moment, other than tropical depression Gamma, which is pretty weak at the moment. If you have any questions, comments about my video, please let me know. Thanks for watching.